The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Parker's Auto Repair, a small mechanic shop on the eastern edge of San Antonio. Daniel Parker wiped the sweat from his forehead with an oil-stained rag, leaving a dark smear across his temple. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of motor oil, gasoline, and the faint aroma of mesquite from a nearby barbecue joint. It was late June, and the temperature had already climbed past 95 degrees before noon. Daniel slid out from beneath a 2008 Ford F-150, his back aching from the uncomfortable position he had maintained for the past hour. At 38 years old, he felt much older. The physical toll of his military service in Afghanistan had left its mark, but it was the invisible wounds that weighed heaviest on him. He stood slowly, stretching his arms above his head, feeling the familiar tightness in his left shoulder where shrapnel had torn through muscle and tendon 7 years ago. "Danny, you got a call on line 2, shouted Pete Hernandez, the shop's front desk manager, from the office doorway. Pete was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a thick mustache and a perpetually cheerful disposition that sometimes grated on Daniel's nerves. Daniel nodded and walked toward the small office at the back of the shop, his boots leaving prints on the concrete floor. He picked up the phone, expecting another customer inquiry about brake pads or transmission problems. Instead, he heard the voice of his ex-wife, Rebecca Parker. "Daniel, we need to talk about this weekend," Rebecca said, her tone clipped and businesslike. "I'm taking Lily to Dallas to visit my parents. You'll have to skip your visitation." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Rebecca, that's the 3rd time this month. The custody agreement says I get her every other weekend. The agreement also says I have discretion for family emergencies and important events. My father's birthday is important, Daniel. Lily wants to be there. Did you ask her? Or did you tell her?" Daniel's voice remained steady, but his hand gripped the phone tighter. There was a pause on the other end. "Don't start this again. You know how difficult things have been. Lily needs stability, and your situation doesn't provide that right now." The word situation hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel knew what she meant. The nightmares that sometimes made him wake up shouting. The counseling sessions with the VA that he attended twice a week. The fact that he lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment instead of the suburban house Rebecca now shared with her new husband, a successful real estate developer named Kenneth Wright. "I'm working on it, Rebecca. Dr. Patterson says I'm making progress." "I'm sure you are. But until you're more settled, I think it's best if we limit Lily's exposure to uncertainty. She's 9 years old, Daniel. She needs consistency." Daniel wanted to argue, to fight for his right to see his daughter, but he also knew that Rebecca held most of the cards. She had the better lawyer, the bigger house, and the stability that courts favored. "Fine," he said quietly. "Tell Lily I love her. I will. Take care of yourself, Daniel." The line went dead. Daniel stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, staring at the calendar on the wall. It showed a picture of the Texas hill country in spring, bluebonnets covering the rolling hills in a carpet of blue and green. His father had loved that sight. John Parker had been a mechanic too, working in this very shop before he died of a heart attack 5 years ago. Daniel had inherited the business, though he sometimes wondered if he had inherited his father's dreams or his own imprisonment. "Everything all right?" Pete asked, peering through the doorway with concern etched on his face. "Yeah, Pete, everything's fine." Daniel forced a smile and headed back to the garage. He had 3 more cars to finish before closing time, and work was the only thing that kept his mind from wandering to dark places. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of oil changes, brake repairs, and diagnostic tests. Daniel worked mechanically, his hands moving through familiar motions while his mind drifted. He thought about Lily, about the way her face lit up when he took her to the San Antonio River walk, how she loved feeding the ducks and eating ice cream while they watched the tourist boats glide past. He thought about the last time he had held her, 2 weeks ago, when she had hugged him tight and whispered, "I miss you, Daddy." By 6 o'clock, the shop was empty except for Daniel. Pete had gone home to his wife and 3 kids. The other mechanic, a young guy named Carlos who was saving money for community college, had left at 5. Daniel locked the front door and stood in the parking lot, looking at his truck, a beat-up 2003 Chevrolet Silverado with rust spots on the wheel wells and a crack in the windshield. He didn't want to go home to his empty apartment. The silence there was suffocating, filled with the echoes of memories he would rather forget. Instead, he climbed into his truck and drove west, toward the outskirts of the city where the buildings gave way to open land and the sky stretched endlessly overhead. 20 minutes later, Daniel pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Longhorn Tavern, a weathered honky-tonk bar with a neon sign that flickered cold beer in red and blue lights. The building was old, with wooden siding that had been painted and repainted so many times that the colors had blended into a dull brown. But inside, the place had character. The walls were covered with vintage concert posters, old license plates, and photographs of local musicians who had played there over the decades. Tom Bradley, the owner, stood behind the bar polishing glasses when Daniel walked in. Tom was 62 years old, tall and lean with silver hair pulled back into a ponytail, and a weathered face that spoke of years spent in the Texas sun. He had been a session musician in Austin during the 70s and 80s, playing guitar for various country and blues artists before settling in San Antonio to open his own place. "Danny boy," Tom called out with a warm smile, "you're early tonight. The Friday crowd won't start rolling in for another hour." "Needed to get out of my head for a while," Daniel said, sliding onto a bar stool. The wood was smooth and worn, shaped by thousands of customers over the years. Tom set down the glass he was polishing and reached for a bottle of Lone Star beer, popping the cap and setting it in front of Daniel without asking. He knew Daniel's preference. "Rough day. Rebecca's keeping Lily from me again this weekend. Says it's for her father's birthday, but I know she's just making excuses." Daniel took a long pull from the beer, feeling the cold liquid slide down his throat. Tom shook his head sympathetically. "That woman doesn't understand what you've been through. None of them do unless they've worn the uniform." "She's not wrong, though," Daniel admitted, staring at the beer bottle. "I'm not the same person I was before I deployed. Hell, I'm not even sure who I am anymore. You're Daniel Parker. You're a good man who served his country and came home carrying weight that most people can't imagine. That doesn't make you broken, son. It makes you human." Before Daniel could respond, the door opened and Robert Chen walked in, carrying his guitar case. Robert was 39, just a year older than Daniel, with short black hair and an athletic build. He wore faded jeans, a worn leather jacket, and a smile that could light up a room. He and Daniel had been best friends since 3rd grade, when Robert's family had moved to San Antonio from Houston, and Daniel had defended him from bullies on the playground. "There's my favorite sad sack," Robert said cheerfully, setting his guitar case down and clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "Tom, get me whatever he's having." "You're playing tonight?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Robert played at the Longhorn every Friday night, a tradition he had maintained for 3 years. "Wouldn't miss it. Plus, I need to practice. Got a big gig coming up next month." Robert accepted a beer from Tom and took a seat next to Daniel. "What kind of gig?" Daniel asked, grateful for the distraction from his own thoughts. "I'm working as a roadie for a concert series that's coming through Texas. We're setting up stages, managing sound equipment, the whole 9 yards. It's good money, and I get to see some incredible shows." Robert's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. He had always loved music, and his work in the live event industry allowed him to be part of something bigger than himself. "Anyone I'd know?" Tom asked, leaning against the bar with interest. Robert grinned. "Let's just say it's someone who's been called the King of Country. Shows in early August at the AT&T Center." Daniel felt a flutter in his chest. There was only one person who earned that title. George Strait, the one and only. I've been working with his crew for the past year, helping out with the Texas shows. The man's a legend, and let me tell you, he's as genuine as they come. None of that celebrity ego nonsense. He treats everyone on the crew with respect, remembers names, asks about families. He's the real deal." Tom whistled low. "That's something special, Bobby. George Strait is Texas royalty. I saw him play in Austin back in '83, right after Fool-Hearted Memory hit big. Changed my whole perspective on what country music could be." Daniel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. George Strait's music had been a constant presence throughout his life. His father had been a massive fan, playing Strait's albums in the shop while they worked on cars together. Songs like Amarillo by Morning, The Chair, and I Cross My Heart had provided the soundtrack to some of Daniel's happiest memories. During his darkest days in Afghanistan, when the stress and fear threatened to overwhelm him, Daniel would put in his earbuds and listen to Strait's smooth voice singing about Texas, about home, about love and loss and redemption. "My dad loved George Strait," Daniel said quietly. "Used to say that Strait was the only singer who understood what it meant to be a real Texan. Not the Hollywood version, but the genuine article." Robert studied his friend's face, seeing the pain behind his eyes. He had known Daniel long enough to recognize when his friend was struggling, and lately, those moments had become more frequent. "You know what, Danny? Why don't you come with me to the concert? I can get you a backstage pass. It might do you some good to see a great show." Daniel shook his head. "I appreciate it, Bobby, but I don't need charity. I can buy my own ticket if I want to go." "It's not charity, you stubborn idiot. It's friendship. Besides, you'd be doing me a favor. I'd rather have someone I trust with me than deal with all those industry types who think they're important, because they know someone who knows someone." Before Daniel could argue further, the door opened again and Jennifer Walsh walked in. She was 36 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, sharp green eyes, and the confident bearing of someone who had faced difficult situations and emerged stronger. She wore scrubs decorated with cartoon characters, evidence of her work as a pediatric nurse at University Hospital. "Well, well, if it isn't the Three Musketeers," she said with a teasing smile, though her eyes showed concern when they landed on Daniel. Jennifer had served as an Army medic during the same deployment as Daniel, though in a different unit. They had met 2 years ago at a VA support group for veterans dealing with PTSD, and she had become one of the few people who truly understood what he was going through. "Jennifer, please tell this hard-headed fool that accepting a free concert ticket from his best friend isn't charity," Robert said, gesturing toward Daniel. Jennifer slid onto the stool on Daniel's other side and ordered a glass of white wine from Tom. "Depends on the concert. If it's anything involving boy bands or electronic dance music, I'd say run for the hills. If it's something worthwhile, take the damn ticket." "It's George Strait," Robert said. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. "Daniel Parker, if you turn down a chance to see George Strait live, I will personally drive to your apartment and drag you to that concert by your ear. That man is a national treasure." Despite himself, Daniel laughed. It felt good to laugh, a rare occurrence these days. All right, I surrender. Bobby, if you're serious about the pass, I'd be honored to go." "Serious as a heart attack," Robert said, clinking his beer bottle against Daniel's. "You're going to love it, man. There's something magical about seeing a live show, especially someone like Strait. It reminds you that there's still beauty in the world, you know?" Tom refilled their drinks and leaned forward, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone. "Danny, I know things have been tough lately. Losing time with Lily, dealing with the memories, feeling like you're stuck in place. But you've got people who care about you. You've got this place where you can come and play music on Friday nights. You've got friends who would walk through fire for you. Don't lose sight of that." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, to letting people see the cracks in his armor. But these people, this ragtag group of friends, had seen him at his worst and hadn't walked away. "I appreciate it, Tom. All of you. Sometimes I just feel like I'm drowning, and I can't find the surface." Jennifer placed her hand on his arm. "Then we'll be your lifeline. That's what we do. We pull each other up when the water gets too deep." The bar began to fill with the Friday night crowd. Young couples looking for a casual date spot, groups of friends celebrating the end of the work week, older regulars who had been coming to the Longhorn for decades. The jukebox played a mix of classic country and Texas blues, creating a warm atmosphere of community and belonging. Robert stood and picked up his guitar case. "All right, I need to set up for the first set. Danny, why don't you join me for a few songs? You've got a good voice, and I know you know all the words to every George Strait song ever recorded." Daniel hesitated. He had played guitar since he was a teenager, taught by his father during slow afternoons at the shop, but he hadn't performed in public since before his deployment, afraid that his hands might shake or his voice might fail him at a crucial moment. "Come on," Jennifer encouraged. "What's the worst that could happen? You forget a lyric? So what? These people aren't here for perfection. They're here for authenticity." Daniel finished his beer and stood. "You're all terrible influences. You know that? That's why you love us," Robert said with a grin. The stage at the Longhorn was small, just a raised platform in the corner with a microphone, a couple of speakers, and barely enough room for two people and their instruments. Robert plugged in his electric guitar and adjusted the microphone while Daniel borrowed Tom's acoustic guitar, a beautiful Martin D28 that had been played by countless musicians over the years. "What do you want to start with?" Robert asked, tuning his guitar. Daniel thought for a moment, then said, "How about Amarillo by Morning? My dad always said that was the perfect song. Simple, honest, and true." "Perfect choice," Robert agreed. As Robert played the opening chords, Daniel closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. When he opened his mouth to sing, the words came naturally, flowing from some deep place inside him that remembered joy, that remembered hope, that remembered who he had been before war had changed him. The crowd quieted as Daniel's voice filled the bar, rich and warm, with just a hint of roughness that added character. He sang about rodeo cowboys and long highways, about making a living doing what you love even when success remains elusive. The song spoke of resilience, of moving forward despite setbacks, of finding meaning in the journey rather than the destination. When the last notes faded, the bar erupted in applause. Daniel opened his eyes, surprised to see genuine appreciation on the faces looking back at him. Tom gave him a thumbs up from behind the bar. Jennifer smiled with tears in her eyes, understanding how much courage it had taken for him to step on that stage. Robert leaned close and whispered, "See? You've still got it, brother. Don't ever forget that." They played for another hour, moving through a mix of classic country songs from George Strait, Willie Nelson, Merle Haggard, and Waylon Jennings. With each song, Daniel felt a little more of the weight lift from his shoulders. The music reminded him that he was more than his pain, more than his struggles, more than the sum of his worst moments. When they finally took a break, Daniel returned to the bar where Tom had a fresh beer waiting. "That was something special, Danny? You should do that more often." "Maybe I will," Daniel said. And for the first time in months, he actually believed it might be possible. As the night wore on, Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in a long time. He laughed at Robert's terrible jokes, listened to Jennifer's stories about the kids she cared for at the hospital, and soaked in the warmth of Tom's fatherly wisdom. These people had become his family, and the Longhorn had become his sanctuary. Around midnight, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Robert brought up the concert again. "So, we're locked in for August 2nd, right? I'll get you a proper backstage pass, the works. You'll get to see how everything works behind the scenes." "I'm in," Daniel confirmed. "Thank you, Bobby. Really. Don't thank me yet. You haven't experienced the chaos of a major concert setup. It's controlled madness, but it's also pretty incredible to be part of something that brings joy to thousands of people." Daniel drove home that night with the windows down, letting the warm Texas air flow through the truck. The streets of San Antonio were quiet at this hour, most residents already asleep. The city had a different character at night, peaceful and contemplative rather than bustling and energetic. When he reached his apartment, a modest second-floor unit in a complex that had seen better days, Daniel sat in his truck for a few minutes before going inside. He looked up at the stars, remembering nights in Afghanistan when the stars had seemed close enough to touch in the clear desert air. Those memories weren't all bad. He had formed deep bonds with his fellow soldiers, men and women who had faced death alongside him and emerged forever changed by the experience. Inside his apartment, Daniel went straight to his bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf, he kept a box of his father's belongings. He pulled it down and carefully removed a vinyl record. Straight from the Heart, George Strait's second studio album, released in 1982. His father had treasured this record, playing it until the grooves were worn and the cover was creased from handling. Daniel didn't have a record player anymore, but he held the album in his hands, studying the cover. George Strait looked young in the photo, with a confident smile and a cowboy hat tilted at just the right angle. The man had gone on to become one of the most successful country artists of all time, with dozens of #1 hits and millions of albums sold. But according to Robert, he had remained humble and genuine, never forgetting where he came from. "I wish you were here, Dad," Daniel whispered to the empty room. "You'd get a kick out of me seeing George Strait live. You always said his music told the truth about life. No pretense, no artificial drama, just honest stories about real people." Daniel carefully returned the album to its box and prepared for bed. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small spark of anticipation for the future. The concert was still more than a month away, but it gave him something to look forward to, a light at the end of a very long tunnel. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Daniel thought about what Tom had said. He had people who cared about him. He had skills and talents. He had survived things that would have broken other people. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to move forward, to rebuild his life into something meaningful again. The nightmares would still come. The pain of being separated from Lily would still ache. The memories of war would still haunt him. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Daniel Parker allowed himself to hope that better days might lie ahead. July arrived with its characteristic Texas heat, the kind that made the air shimmer above the asphalt and sent most sensible people scurrying for air conditioning by mid-morning. Daniel fell into his usual routine at Parker's Auto Repair. Arriving at 7 each morning, and working until the heat became unbearable in the unair-conditioned garage. The shop's industrial fans did little more than push hot air from one side of the building to the other. But Daniel had learned to cope. He kept a cooler filled with ice water nearby and took frequent breaks in the small air-conditioned office. Despite the oppressive weather, Daniel noticed a subtle shift in his mood. The anticipation of the upcoming George Strait concert provided a focal point for his thoughts, something positive to think about during the long hours under car hoods. He found himself humming Strait's songs while he worked, much to Pete's amusement. "You've been in a better mood lately," Pete observed one afternoon, handing Daniel a wrench. "Whatever's causing it, keep it up. The customers have noticed, too." "Mrs. Rodriguez told me yesterday that you actually smiled when you explained her brake problem. Said it was the first time she'd seen you look happy in months." Daniel felt a twinge of guilt. He hadn't realized how much his depression had affected his interactions with others. "I guess I've got something to look forward to. Bobby's taking me to see George Strait next month." Pete's eyes lit up. "No kidding? That's fantastic. I tried to get tickets when they went on sale, but they sold out in about 15 minutes. That show's going to be legendary. Bobby works with the crew so he can get backstage passes. I still can't quite believe it's happening." "Your dad would have been thrilled," Pete said softly. "John used to talk about George Strait all the time. Said he was the real deal. Not like those pop country singers who were more interested in their hair than their music." Daniel smiled at the memory. "Yeah, Dad had strong opinions about what constituted real country music. He'd probably disown me if I started listening to that mainstream radio stuff." The shop phone rang, and Pete hurried to answer it, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He finished the brake job on a Honda Accord and moved on to diagnosing an electrical problem in a Dodge Ram. The work was methodical and satisfying, requiring just enough concentration to keep his mind occupied without overwhelming him. That evening, Daniel stopped by the Longhorn earlier than usual. Tom was setting up for the evening crowd, arranging clean glasses behind the bar and restocking the beer coolers. The early evening light streamed through the windows, giving the old bar a golden glow that softened its rough edges. "You're here early again," Tom noted. "This is becoming a habit." "It's better than going home to an empty apartment," Daniel admitted, sliding onto his usual bar stool. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you about something." Tom set a beer in front of Daniel and leaned against the bar. "I'm all ears." "I've been thinking about what you said a few weeks ago, about how I've got talents and shouldn't waste them. I was wondering if maybe you'd let me play here more regularly. Nothing formal, just maybe every Friday night when Bobby's playing. I could do harmonies, maybe take the lead on a few songs." A broad smile spread across Tom's weathered face. "Danny, I'd be honored. In fact, I was hoping you'd ask. You've got a gift, son. Your voice has real emotion in it, the kind you can't fake. People respond to that." Relief flooded through Daniel. He had been nervous about making the request, afraid of rejection or worse, pity. "I don't want special treatment because of my situation. If I'm not good enough, tell me." "Stop that right now," Tom said firmly. "You're good enough because you're talented, period. Your past doesn't define your worth. You served your country, and that's honorable. But your value as a musician has nothing to do with your military service. You've got the goods, and people deserve to hear you." Before Daniel could respond, Robert burst through the door carrying 2 large bags of equipment. His face was flushed from the heat, and sweat dampened his shirt. "A little help?" he called out. Daniel and Tom hurried over to help him carry the bags to the stage area. Robert had brought additional sound equipment, including a new microphone and a portable mixer. "What's all this for?" Daniel asked. "I'm upgrading the sound system here," Robert explained. "Tom's been letting me play here for years. and I figure it's time I gave back a little. Plus, if you're going to be performing regularly, we need better equipment. That old mic has seen better days. Bobby, you didn't have to do this, Tom protested, though his eyes showed appreciation. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. Robert began unpacking the equipment with practiced efficiency. Besides, I've been working so much with professional sound systems that it's actually painful to use outdated gear. Consider it selfish, on my part. Daniel helped Robert set up the new equipment, learning about different connections and settings. Robert explained how to adjust the levels to avoid feedback, how to balance the sound for different types of voices, and how to create the right atmosphere for different styles of music. This stuff is more complicated than I thought, Daniel admitted. It's an art and a science, Robert agreed. But once you understand the basics, it becomes intuitive. The goal is always the same: make the music sound as good as possible so the audience can connect with it emotionally. As they worked, Jennifer arrived with her friend Cassandra Lopez, a social worker who specialized in veteran services. Cassandra was in her early 40s, with dark hair streaked with gray and kind eyes that had witnessed countless stories of struggle and survival. "I hope you don't mind me bringing Cassandra," Jennifer said. "I thought you two should meet. She's helped a lot of veterans navigate the system and find resources." Daniel shook Cassandra's hand, initially wary. He had dealt with enough social workers and counselors to last a lifetime, many of them well-meaning, but ultimately ineffective. But something about Cassandra's direct gaze and firm handshake suggested she was different. "Jennifer's told me about you," Cassandra said. "I understand you're dealing with custody issues with your daughter." "Yeah, my ex-wife keeps finding reasons to limit my visitation. Says I'm not stable enough." Daniel tried to keep the bitterness out of his voice, but didn't quite succeed. Unfortunately, that's a common problem for veterans dealing with PTSD. The courts often see mental health treatment as a liability rather than a sign of responsibility. But there are ways to fight back legally. I work with several attorneys who specialize in veteran family law. They understand the unique challenges you're facing. Daniel felt a flicker of hope. "I can't afford a high-priced lawyer. I'm barely keeping the shop afloat as it is." These attorneys work on a sliding scale, and some cases they take pro bono if they believe in the cause. Would you be willing to meet with one? No obligation, just a consultation to understand your options. Daniel looked at Jennifer, who nodded encouragingly. "What do I have to lose?" "Absolutely nothing," Cassandra assured him. "I'll set something up for next week. In the meantime, I'd recommend documenting everything. Keep a journal of your therapy sessions, your work schedule, any interactions with your daughter. Show that you're actively engaged in your treatment and maintaining a stable lifestyle." "I can do that," Daniel agreed. As the evening progressed, the Longhorn filled with its usual Friday crowd. Robert and Daniel took the stage around 8 o'clock, and the new sound system made a noticeable difference. Daniel's voice came through clear and strong, filling every corner of the bar without distortion or feedback. They opened with "The Fireman," one of George Strait's upbeat songs that got the crowd clapping along. Daniel felt the familiar nervousness at the start, but as he sang, confidence flooded through him. The audience responded enthusiastically, and by the second verse, he was fully immersed in the performance. They moved through a set that mixed Strait's classics with songs from other country legends. Robert took the lead on some numbers, while Daniel handled harmonies, and they traded off on others. The chemistry between them was natural, born of decades of friendship and countless hours listening to music together. During a break, a woman in her 50s approached Daniel. She had short gray hair and wore a denim jacket decorated with military patches. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My son served in Iraq. He came home different, struggling with a lot of the same things you probably face. Seeing you up there, Doing something positive with your life gives me hope for him." Daniel didn't know what to say. He settled for, "Thank you. Tell your son he's not alone. There are resources and people who understand." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and returned to her table. Jennifer appeared at Daniel's elbow. "That was beautiful, what you just did. You gave that woman something precious. Hope." "I didn't do anything," Daniel protested. "You showed up. You performed. You demonstrated that it's possible to move forward despite the pain." "That's not nothing, Daniel. That's everything." The second set went even better than the first. Daniel's nerves had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine enjoyment. He found himself smiling, joking with Robert between songs, and connecting with the audience in a way he hadn't thought possible. Near the end of the night, Robert surprised him by announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Daniel here is going to see George Strait live next month. So let's do one more Strait song to celebrate. Danny, this one's all yours. Give us I Cross My Heart." Daniel's breath caught. "I Cross My Heart" was one of his father's favorites, a beautiful ballad about eternal love and commitment. It was also technically challenging, requiring emotional depth and vocal control. "I don't know if I can do that one justice," Daniel said quietly. "Trust yourself," Robert encouraged. "You've got this." Daniel took a deep breath and nodded. Robert played the gentle opening chords, and Daniel began to sing. The words spoke of promises made and kept, of love that endures through time and hardship. As he sang, Daniel thought about his father, about Lily, about all the relationships in his life that mattered. His voice carried the weight of genuine emotion, each word delivered with sincerity. The bar had gone completely silent. Every person focused on the moment. When Daniel reached the final chorus, his voice soared with power and vulnerability, laying bare his heart for everyone to witness. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the entire bar erupted in thunderous applause. People stood, whistling and cheering. Tom had tears running down his face. Jennifer was openly crying, and even Robert looked moved. Daniel stood there, overwhelmed by the response. He had just shared something deeply personal with a room full of strangers. And instead of judgment or pity, he had received acceptance and appreciation. As the crowd dispersed and closing time approached, the core group gathered at the bar. Tom poured a round of whiskey, his premium stuff that he saved for special occasions. "To Daniel," Tom said, raising his glass, "for reminding us what real music sounds like." They clinked glasses and drank. The whiskey burned pleasantly, warming Daniel from the inside out. "You know what struck me tonight?" Cassandra said. "Watching you perform, I saw a man who's fighting his way back to himself. That's one of the hardest journeys anyone can make, and you're doing it with grace and courage." "I don't feel courageous," Daniel admitted. "Most days, I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "Courage isn't the absence of fear or struggle," Cassandra countered. "It's continuing to move forward despite them. Every day you get up, go to work, attend your therapy sessions, and show up for your friends. You're demonstrating courage." Robert clapped Daniel on the back. "Speaking of showing up, we need to talk logistics for the concert. The show's on August 2nd, which is a Friday. I need to be there early to help with setup, but I can get you in around 6. The show starts at 8, but you'll want to see the backstage area and how everything comes together." "I'll be there," Daniel promised. "I've already blocked out the whole day." "Good. And Danny? This is going to be special. George Strait puts on an incredible show, but more than that, there's an energy to his concerts. People come together to celebrate music and Texas and everything that makes this place home. It's about community and connection. I think you're really going to feel it." As Daniel drove home that night, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. He was performing regularly, taking steps to fight for more time with Lily, and actually looking forward to the future. The darkness hadn't disappeared. He still had nightmares, still struggled with anxiety, still felt the weight of his experiences. But now, there were moments of light breaking through, moments that reminded him life could be good again. He thought about the concert and what it might be like to see George Strait perform live. His father would have given anything for that opportunity. In a way, Daniel would be there for both of them, carrying his father's memory and love of music into that arena. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and preparation. Daniel met with the attorney Cassandra had recommended, a sharp woman named Linda Vaughn, who specialized in veteran rights cases. She reviewed his custody situation and immediately identified several legal issues with how his ex-wife was interpreting their agreement. "We can file a motion to clarify the custody terms and enforce your visitation rights," Linda explained during their consultation. "Rebecca's pattern of cancellations and restrictions goes beyond what the agreement allows. We'll also document your active participation in therapy and your stable employment. The goal is to show the court that you're a responsible father who deserves meaningful time with his daughter." For the first time since losing equal custody, Daniel felt like he had an advocate who truly understood his position. Linda didn't see him as broken or dangerous. She saw him as a father fighting for his rights. At the shop, business picked up as the summer heat prompted more air conditioning failures and overheated engines. Daniel threw himself into the work, and Pete commented multiple times on his improved attitude and energy. Even Carlos, the young mechanic, noticed the change and started asking Daniel for advice about life and relationships. At the Longhorn, the Friday night performances became an anticipated event. The crowds grew larger each week, and Tom started advertising live music Fridays with Robert Chen and Daniel Parker on social media. People who had never visited the Longhorn before showed up specifically to hear them play. Jennifer continued to be a steady presence, offering emotional support and practical advice. She introduced Daniel to other veterans from her support group, creating a network of people who understood the unique challenges of military service. Daniel found himself becoming more social, accepting invitations to barbecues and casual gatherings. Through it all, the concert on August 2nd loomed like a beacon. Robert kept Daniel updated on the preparations, sharing stories about working with George Strait's crew and the meticulous attention to detail that went into every show. "The man's a perfectionist," Robert said one night at the bar, "but not in an ego-driven way. He genuinely wants every person in that arena to have the best possible experience. He does sound checks personally, walks the venue to check sight lines, and makes sure even the cheapest seats have good views. It's all about respect for the fans. That's rare in the entertainment industry," Tom observed. "Most big stars lose touch with what matters." "George Strait never did," Robert confirmed. "You know he lost his daughter in a car accident back in the 80s? Jennifer was only 13. But instead of becoming bitter, he and his wife started a foundation to help children. He turned his grief into something positive. That's the kind of man he is." Daniel felt a deep connection to that story. Loss and grief were things he understood intimately. The idea that someone could channel that pain into helping others resonated deeply. As August 2nd approached, Daniel's anticipation grew. He found himself counting down the days, checking the weather forecast, and even planning what he would wear. It felt silly to be so excited about a concert, but he allowed himself the feeling. Joy had been absent from his life for too long. The night before the concert, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about his father, about all the times they had listened to George Strait's music together in the shop. He imagined what his father would say if he could see Daniel now, rebuilding his life step by step. "I'm trying, Dad," Daniel whispered into the darkness. "I'm really trying." Tomorrow would be more than just a concert. It would be a celebration of music, memory, and the possibility of healing. Daniel didn't know exactly what to expect, but for the first time in years, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. August 2nd dawned clear and hot, with the sun climbing into a cloudless sky that promised another scorching Texas day. Daniel woke early, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded him of childhood Christmas mornings. He showered, dressed in clean jeans and his best Western shirt, a dark blue pearl snap his father had given him years ago, and spent extra time making sure his boots were polished. The day at Parker's Auto Repair crawled by. Daniel found it nearly impossible to concentrate on the repair jobs in front of him. He double-checked his work multiple times, paranoid that his distraction might cause him to make a mistake. Pete noticed his preoccupation and laughed. "Just go home early," Pete suggested around 3 o'clock. "You're no good to anyone here. Your head's already at that concert." "You sure? We've still got 2 jobs on the schedule. Carlos and I can handle it. Go on, get out of here. Have a great time tonight." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He cleaned up, grabbed his keys, and drove to his apartment to change into fresh clothes and wait for Robert to pick him up. Robert arrived at 5:30, driving his well-worn Ford Explorer loaded with equipment cases and cables. He looked energized, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "You ready for this?" Robert asked as Daniel climbed into the passenger seat. "I think so. Should I be nervous?" "Nah, you're just going to have the time of your life. Trust me." They drove toward the AT&T Center, the massive arena on the east side of San Antonio that hosted everything from Spurs basketball games to major concerts. As they got closer, traffic thickened with other concert-goers. Daniel saw families, couples, groups of friends, all heading toward the same destination with anticipation written on their faces. Robert bypassed the main parking lots and drove to a security gate marked "Authorized Personnel Only." He showed his crew credentials to the guard, who waved them through to a backstage parking area. "This is surreal," Daniel muttered, looking around at the tour buses, equipment trucks, and organized chaos of concert preparation. "Welcome to my world," Robert said with a grin. "Come on, let's get you checked in." They entered through a service entrance and navigated a maze of concrete hallways. Crew members hurried past carrying equipment, speaking into headsets, and consulting clipboards. The atmosphere buzzed with focused energy. Robert stopped at a security desk, where a woman with short blonde hair and multiple passes hanging from her neck checked their names against a list. "Robert Chen and guest Daniel Parker," Robert announced. The woman found their names and handed each of them laminated passes. Daniel's read, "Guest, all access," in bold letters. He stared at it, hardly believing it was real. "Bobby, this is too much," Daniel started to say. "Stop. You deserve this. Now come on. I want to show you around before things get too crazy." For the next hour, Robert gave Daniel a behind-the-scenes tour of the concert operation. They visited the sound booth, where engineers were doing final checks on the equipment. Robert explained how they balanced audio for an arena that would soon hold 15,000 people. They saw the lighting rig being programmed, creating elaborate patterns and effects that would enhance the performance. They walked backstage where the band was doing their sound check. Musicians tuned instruments, tested microphones, and ran through portions of songs. The professionalism and precision impressed Daniel. These weren't just talented musicians, they were craftsmen who took their work seriously. "George usually arrives about an hour before showtime," Robert explained. "He likes to do a final walkthrough, meet some of the crew, and get into the right headspace for the performance. At 7 o'clock, Robert had to report for his crew duties, helping with final equipment checks and preparing for potential issues during the show. He left Daniel in a hospitality area where crew members and guests could relax. There were couches, a catered buffet with Texas barbecue, and multiple television screens showing different camera angles of the stage. Daniel grabbed a plate of brisket and potato salad and found a quiet corner. He watched the arena fill through one of the monitors, thousands of people streaming to their seats, the collective energy building with every passing minute. He thought about texting Lily but decided against it. Rebecca would just see it as him bothering their daughter when he wasn't supposed to. Instead, he took a photo of his backstage pass and sent it to Jennifer with the caption, "This is really happening." She responded immediately, "I'm so happy for you. Soak in every moment. You've earned this." Around 7:30, there was a shift in the backstage atmosphere. People stood a little straighter, moved with more purpose. Daniel sensed something was about to happen. Then he saw him. George Strait walked through the backstage area with an easy confidence that came from decades of performing. He wore jeans, a crisp white shirt, and his signature cowboy hat. What struck Daniel immediately was how normal he seemed. There was no entourage of handlers, no air of superiority. He stopped to shake hands with crew members, asked a lighting technician about her new baby, and thanked the catering staff for the food. Daniel watched from his corner, not wanting to intrude. This was George Strait's workplace, his moment of preparation before giving thousands of people an unforgettable experience. The last thing Daniel wanted was to be another fan asking for attention. But then Robert appeared, walking alongside George and talking animatedly. They were headed in Daniel's direction. Daniel's heart rate kicked up. Was Robert actually bringing George Strait over to meet him? "George, this is my best friend I was telling you about." "Daniel Parker," Robert said as they approached. "Danny, meet George Strait." George extended his hand with a warm smile. "Robert's been talking about you. Says you're a fellow veteran and one hell of a singer." Daniel shook his hand, momentarily speechless. George Strait's grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of a genuine person rather than a celebrity going through motions. "Mr. Strait, it's an honor. I've been listening to your music my whole life. My father was your biggest fan. Please, call me George. And thank you. That means a lot, especially the part about your father. Were you too close?" "Very close. He taught me to work on cars and appreciate real country music. He passed away 5 years ago, but I think about him every day." George's expression showed sincere empathy. "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing family is the hardest thing. My daughter Jennifer died when she was just 13. Time helps, but you never really get over it. You just learn to carry it differently." Daniel nodded, appreciating that George didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. Robert mentioned what happened. "I can't imagine that kind of pain, but I heard you turned it into something positive with your foundation. We try. My wife Norma and I wanted to make sure something good came from such a terrible tragedy. If we can help other families, give kids opportunities they might not have otherwise, then Jennifer's memory lives on in a meaningful way." They talked for several more minutes. George asked about Daniel's military service, and when he learned Daniel had served in Afghanistan, he shared that he had performed for troops overseas multiple times and had deep respect for their sacrifice. "You know, Robert mentioned you sing," George said. "What's your style? You a traditionalist like me, or do you go for that new stuff?" "Definitely traditional. My dad raised me right," Daniel said, drawing a laugh from George. "Though I'm nowhere near your level. I just play at a local bar with Bobby on Friday nights. That's where it starts, though. Some of the best musicians I know came out of small venues where they learned to connect with audiences." Never underestimate the value of that experience. Robert checked his watch. "George, I hate to interrupt, but it's about time." George nodded and turned back to Daniel. "It was great meeting you, Daniel. Enjoy the show. And keep singing. The world needs more people who understand what real country music is about." They shook hands again, and George headed toward the stage entrance, stopping briefly to speak with his band members. Daniel stood there, processing what had just happened. He had just had a genuine conversation with George Strait, and it had felt like talking to a friend rather than meeting a superstar. "He's something else, isn't he?" Robert said, appearing at Daniel's shoulder. "Bobby, I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to thank me. Just enjoy the show. Speaking of which, you should head to your spot. You're right behind the soundboard, one of the best views in the house." Robert guided Daniel through the backstage maze to a special viewing area reserved for crew families and VIP guests. The seats offered an unobstructed view of the stage, while being elevated enough to see over the crowd. The arena was now completely full, 15,000 people creating a low roar of conversation and anticipation. The lights dimmed. The crowd erupted in cheers. Daniel felt goosebumps rise on his arms as the opening notes of "The Fireman" filled the arena. George Strait walked on stage with the same casual confidence he had shown backstage, acknowledged the crowd's welcome with a wave, and launched into the song. For the next 2 hours, Daniel was transported. George moved through his catalog of hits with masterful pacing, mixing upbeat numbers with emotional ballads, never songs with classics that had the entire arena singing along. His voice was flawless, his stage presence magnetic without being showy. He told brief stories between songs, thanked the audience for their support over the years, and made 15,000 people feel like he was performing just for them. Daniel found himself singing along, tears streaming down his face during "I Cross My Heart" and "The Chair." He thought about his father, about Lily, about all the roads his life had taken to bring him to this moment. The music wrapped around him like a warm embrace, reminding him that beauty still existed in the world, that joy was still possible, that healing was within reach. During an instrumental break, Daniel looked around at the sea of faces. He saw elderly couples holding hands, young families with children on their shoulders, groups of friends celebrating together. All different backgrounds, ages, and stories, united by their love of music and appreciation for an artist who had remained true to himself for 4 decades. This was what Robert had meant about community and connection. This was bigger than just entertainment. This was people coming together to celebrate shared values: authenticity, tradition, respect for craftsmanship, and the simple beauty of a well-told story set to music. When George performed "Amarillo by Morning" late in the set, Daniel closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. He was 10 years old again, sitting in his father's shop on a lazy Saturday afternoon, watching John Parker rebuild a carburetor while this song played on a battered radio. His father singing along, occasionally hitting Daniel with a playful elbow to get him to join in. The smell of motor oil and the warmth of the Texas sun streaming through the garage door. A moment of perfect contentment before life got complicated. The concert ended with "All My Exes Live in Texas," a fun, upbeat song that sent everyone home with smiles on their faces. As the final notes faded and George took his bow, the arena exploded with appreciation. The ovation lasted several minutes, George waving his thanks and tipping his hat before finally leaving the stage. Daniel sat there as the crowd began to disperse, overwhelmed by what he had just experienced. He wiped his eyes, not embarrassed by the tears. This had been more than a concert. It had been a reminder of who he was, where he came from, and what mattered most. Robert appeared, flushed and sweaty from his work during the show. "So, What did you think? Bobby, that was... I don't have words. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me here, for making this happen. This is something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Robert pulled him into a quick hug. You're my brother, Danny. Seeing you happy makes me happy. Now come on. There's one more thing. What do you mean? George wants to see you again. He asked if you'd come backstage before he leaves. Daniel's eyes widened. Are you serious? Dead serious. Come on. They navigated back through the backstage area, which was now bustling with crew members breaking down equipment and preparing for the next stop on the tour. Robert led Daniel to a small private room where George was signing some memorabilia for crew members. When George saw Daniel, he smiled. Hey, what did you think of the show? It was incredible. Honestly, I don't think I've ever experienced anything like that. You made 15,000 people feel like you were singing directly to them. That's always the goal. Make it personal, make it real. George signed the last item and handed it back to a grateful crew member, then turned his full attention to Daniel. Robert tells me you've been going through a tough time. Readjusting to civilian life, dealing with some family challenges. Daniel glanced at Robert, who shrugged apologetically. I might have shared a few things, but only because I thought George might have some perspective worth hearing. George pulled out a chair and motioned for Daniel to sit. Look, I don't pretend to know what you've been through in service. That's something only fellow veterans truly understand. But I do know about struggle and loss, and finding ways to keep moving forward. He spoke about losing Jennifer, about how the grief had nearly destroyed him and his wife, how they had leaned on family, faith, and eventually their foundation worked to channel their pain into something construct. I'll continue and complete the story for you. He spoke about losing Jennifer, about how the grief had nearly destroyed him and his wife, how they had leaned on family, faith, and eventually their foundation worked to channel their pain into something constructive. The thing about pain, George said, is that you can let it define you, or you can let it refine you. It's a choice you have to make every single day. Some days are easier than others, but you keep making that choice. Daniel absorbed these words, feeling their truth resonate deep within him. I'm trying. Some days I feel like I'm making progress, and other days I feel like I'm right back where I started. That's normal. Healing isn't linear. It's more like a spiral. You circle back to the same issues, but each time you're at a different level, with more tools and understanding. George stood and walked to a small table where several items were laid out. He picked up a guitar, a beautiful acoustic instrument with George Strait inlaid on the fretboard. This is one of my touring guitars, George said, running his hand along the neck. I'd like you to have it. Daniel's jaw dropped. I can't accept that. That's too much. Sure you can. Robert tells me you've been performing at Tom Bradley's place, that you've got real talent. Every serious musician needs a quality instrument. This guitar has been with me for a lot of miles, a lot of shows. I'd like to think it'll inspire you to keep playing, keep healing through music. Daniel's hands trembled as he accepted the guitar. The weight of it felt substantial, real. Mr. Strait, George, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep singing. Say you'll keep fighting for time with your daughter. Say you'll remember that your best days are still ahead of you, not behind you. George placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You've served your country with honor. Now it's time to serve yourself with that same dedication. Get the help you need. Lean on your friends. And don't give up on yourself. Tears flowed freely down Daniel's face now. He didn't try to hide them. Thank you. Not just for the guitar, but for this whole evening. For treating me like a person instead of just another fan. For sharing your wisdom and your time. We're all just people, Daniel. Some of us are fortunate enough to have a platform to reach others, but underneath it all, we're dealing with the same struggles, the same hopes, the same need for connection. George smiled. Now, I've got to hit the road. The tour doesn't stop, but I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll come see me perform again. Bring your daughter, if you can work it out. I do a Christmas show every year in Las Vegas. Maybe that could be something special for you too. I promise I'll try, Daniel said. They shook hands one final time, and George gave him a quick, genuine hug before heading toward his tour bus. Robert stood nearby, grinning from ear to ear. I told you this would be special, Robert said. Bobby, you have no idea. This man just changed my life. They walked back through the arena, which was now mostly empty, except for crew members methodically breaking down the stage and packing equipment. Daniel carried the guitar carefully, treating it like the precious gift it was. On the drive home, Daniel was mostly quiet, processing everything that had happened. Robert respected his silence, occasionally glancing over with a knowing smile. When Robert dropped him off at his apartment, Daniel turned to his friend. I don't know how I can ever repay you for tonight. You already have, just by being my friend all these years. Besides, this is what we do for each other. You'd do the same for me. In a heartbeat, Daniel confirmed. Inside his apartment, Daniel carefully placed the guitar on his bed and just stared at it for several minutes. The evening felt surreal, like something from a dream. But the guitar was real, tangible proof that it had actually happened. He picked up his phone and called Jennifer, knowing she'd still be awake despite the late hour. How was it? She answered immediately. Daniel told her everything. The concert, meeting George Strait twice, the conversation about healing and moving forward, and finally, the incredible gift of the guitar. Danny, that's amazing, Jennifer said, her voice thick with emotion. Do you understand how significant this is? Not just the guitar, but what it represents. George Strait, one of the biggest stars in country music, saw something in you worth investing in. He believes in your potential. I know. I'm still trying to process it all. This is a turning point. I can feel it. You're going to look back on tonight as the moment things started to change. After hanging up, Daniel sat on his couch with the guitar in his lap. He tuned it carefully and strummed a few chords. The tone was magnificent, rich and warm with perfect sustain. He began playing I Cross My Heart, the song he had performed at the Longhorn, the song that had meant so much to his father. As he played, Daniel felt something shift inside him. The weight he had carried for so long felt lighter. The darkness that had threatened to swallow him seemed less overwhelming. He wasn't magically cured of his PTSD or his problems with Rebecca, but he had hope. Real, tangible hope that better days were possible. He played until his fingers hurt, working through George Strait's catalog, mixing in other country classics, and even attempting some of his own improvisations. Music had always been his escape, but tonight it felt like more than that. It felt like a pathway back to himself. Around 2 in the morning, Daniel finally put the guitar down and went to bed. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without dreading the nightmares, focusing instead on the memory of 15,000 people united by music, and one legendary artist who had taken the time to show kindness to a struggling veteran. The morning after the concert, Daniel woke feeling different. The apartment was still the same, his circumstances hadn't magically improved, but something fundamental had shifted in his perspective. He looked at George Strait's guitar resting against the wall and smiled. After coffee, he called Linda Vaughn, his attorney, and scheduled a meeting to discuss moving forward more aggressively with his custody case. Then he texted Rebecca, asking if he could FaceTime with Lily that afternoon. To his surprise, she agreed. At 3 o'clock, Daniel's phone rang with the video call. Lily's face appeared on screen, her brown eyes bright with curiosity. "Hi, Daddy," she said enthusiastically. "Hey, sweetheart. How are you?" "Good. I got an A on my science project about butterflies. Mom helped me make a poster." "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." Daniel's heart ached seeing her through a screen instead of in person, but he pushed the sadness aside. "I have something exciting to tell you. I went to a concert last night." "What kind of concert?" "George Strait. Do you remember me telling you about him? He was Grandpa John's favorite singer." Lily's face lit up. "The cowboy music guy. Did you really see him?" "I did. And I got to meet him. He was really nice, and he gave me something special." Daniel grabbed the guitar and showed it to her through the camera. "This is his guitar. He said I should keep playing music." "Wow, that's so cool, Daddy. Can you play me a song?" Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "Of course, baby girl." He played a simplified version of "Love Without End, Amen," one of George Strait's songs about a father's unconditional love for his child. As he sang, he watched Lily's face on the screen, seeing her smile and sway to the music. When he finished, she clapped. "That was beautiful, Daddy. I love when you sing. I love you, Lily, more than anything in the world." They talked for another 15 minutes about school, her friends, and her upcoming birthday in September. When Rebecca's voice called Lily away for dinner, Daniel felt the familiar pang of loss, but it was tempered by gratitude for the connection they had just shared. That evening at the Longhorn, Daniel arrived early carrying George's guitar. Tom was behind the bar, and his eyes widened when he saw the instrument. "Is that what I think it is?" Tom asked. Daniel told the story of the previous night, watching Tom's expression move from disbelief to joy to something like awe. "Danny, that's incredible. George Strait personally gave you one of his guitars? Do you understand how rare something like that is?" "I'm starting to. It still doesn't feel real." Jennifer arrived shortly after, followed by Robert and Cassandra. Word had spread quickly through their small circle about Daniel's experience, and everyone wanted to hear the details firsthand. Daniel recounted the evening, showing them the guitar and sharing George's words about healing and moving forward. "That man is a class act," Cassandra said. "I've worked with a lot of celebrities through various charity events, and most of them are just there for the photo opportunity. But George Strait has a reputation for genuine involvement and care. The fact that he took time with you speaks volumes about his character." "It also speaks volumes about Danny's character," Jennifer added. "George Strait wouldn't have invested that kind of time and given such a meaningful gift to just anyone. He saw something worth nurturing." As the bar filled with the Friday night crowd, anticipation built for the performance. Robert and Daniel took the stage around 8 o'clock, and before they started playing, Daniel addressed the audience. "Thanks for coming out tonight, everyone. Before we begin, I want to share something special that happened to me last night." He told them about meeting George Strait and receiving the guitar, keeping the details brief but conveying the significance of the experience. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, and several people called out congratulations. Then Daniel strummed the first chords on George's guitar, and the sound that filled the bar was noticeably different. Richer, fuller, more resonant than the instruments he had been using. They opened with Amarillo by Morning as a tribute to George Strait, and Daniel poured everything he had into the performance. His voice carried the emotion of the past 24 hours, the gratitude and hope and renewed sense of purpose. The audience responded in kind, fully engaged with every word. Throughout the evening, Daniel noticed something remarkable. People weren't just listening, they were connecting. Couples held hands and swayed together. A group of older veterans in the corner raised their beers in salute during Troubadour. A young woman openly cried during "The Chair," and her friends put their arms around her in comfort. This was what music could do. It created moments of shared humanity, reminded people of their own stories and emotions, and built bridges between strangers. Daniel understood now why George Strait had remained committed to touring for over 40 years. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about these moments of connection. During a break, a man in his early 60s approached the stage. He had gray hair, weathered skin, and wore a Vietnam veteran's cap. "Son, I just wanted to thank you," the man said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I could hear it in your voice, the things you've seen and dealt with. My generation came home to protests and shame. Your generation came home to a different world, but you still carry the weight. Seeing you up there, making something beautiful from the pain, that means something to an old soldier like me." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for your service, sir. And thank you for those words. They mean more than you know. Keep playing, son. The world needs more light, and you're putting some out there." As the veteran walked away, Daniel felt Jennifer's hand on his shoulder. She had witnessed the exchange and smiled through tears. "See what you're doing?" she said. "You're not just entertaining people, you're healing them. And in the process, you're healing yourself." The second set was even more powerful than the first. Daniel's confidence had grown exponentially, not from ego, but from genuine connection with the audience. He and Robert moved seamlessly through their set list, reading each other's musical cues with the ease of long friendship. Near the end of the night, Tom joined them on stage with his own guitar. "Mind if an old man sits in for one?" he asked. "It would be an honor," Daniel said. The three of them performed a medley of Texas country classics. Songs by Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and of course, George Strait. The bar erupted in appreciation, the entire crowd singing along to the familiar lyrics. It felt less like a performance and more like a community celebration. When the music finally ended around midnight, the crowd gave them a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Daniel stood there, taking it all in, remembering what George had said about making it personal and real. He had done that tonight, and the response was overwhelming. As people filed out, many stopped to shake Daniel's hand, share their own stories, or simply say, "Thank you." He listened to each person, gave them his full attention, and tried to offer whatever comfort or encouragement he could. It was exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. "You found your calling," Tom said as they cleaned up after the last customer had left. "This is what you're meant to do, Danny. Not instead of the auto shop, but in addition to it. You've got a gift for connecting with people through music." "I never thought of myself as a performer," Daniel admitted. "I just liked playing for fun." "The best performers never set out to be performers," Tom replied. "They just follow their passion and let it lead them where it's supposed to go. You're doing that now." Over the next 2 weeks, life took on a new rhythm for Daniel. He worked at the shop during the day, attended his therapy sessions with renewed commitment, and performed at the Longhorn every Friday night. The audiences continued to grow, and Tom had to start turning people away due to fire code capacity limits. Linda Vaughn filed the motion to clarify Daniel's custody agreement and enforce his visitation rights. Rebecca's attorney responded with the expected pushback, but Linda was prepared with documentation of Daniel's stability, employment, therapy compliance, and character references from Jennifer, Robert, and Tom. "We have a strong case," Linda assured Daniel during a meeting in her office. "The court will see that you're actively working on your mental health, maintaining steady employment, and have a solid support system. Rebecca's pattern of cancellations without legitimate cause won't look good to the judge." Daniel also started working with Cassandra on longer-term goals. She connected him with a financial advisor who specialized in helping veterans, and together they created a plan to improve his financial situation and eventually buy a house where Lily could have her own room when she visited. Small steps, Cassandra reminded him. You don't have to fix everything overnight. Just keep moving forward. The guitar became a source of meditation and therapy for Daniel. Every evening when he got home from work, he would play for at least an hour. Sometimes he worked on new songs, sometimes he just improvised, letting his fingers find patterns while his mind wandered. The act of creating music helped process emotions he couldn't express in words. He also started writing his own songs. Nothing sophisticated at first, just simple verses about his experiences, his feelings, his hopes for the future. He shared some of them with Robert, who encouraged him to keep developing them. "You've got something real here," Robert said, after hearing one of Daniel's original compositions about missing his daughter. "This isn't generic country song stuff. This is authentic emotion. People will connect with that." One afternoon in mid-August, Daniel's phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made him pick up. "Daniel Parker?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Daniel. My name is Michelle Torres. I'm a producer for Hill Country Radio, a regional station that focuses on traditional country music. Tom Bradley gave me your number. I was at the Longhorn last Friday night, and I was incredibly impressed with your performance. I'd like to talk to you about doing a live session for our station." Daniel's mind raced. Wow, I'm honored. But I'm not a professional musician. I just play locally." "That's exactly what makes you interesting," Michelle explained. "You're authentic. You've got a real story and real talent. Our listeners are tired of overproduced Nashville stuff. They want something genuine, and that's what you offer. Would you be willing to come to the station next week and talk about it?" "Yes, absolutely," Daniel agreed, still processing what was happening. After hanging up, he immediately called Robert, then Jennifer, then Tom. Everyone was thrilled, but not surprised. "Talent finds a way to rise," Tom said sagely. "You just had to give it permission." The meeting at Hill Country Radio went better than Daniel had hoped. Michelle and the station manager, a friendly man named Jack Brennan, explained their vision for featuring local artists who represented the true spirit of Texas country music. "We'd want you to perform 3 or 4 songs live in our studio," Michelle explained. "We'd do an interview segment where you talk about your background, your influences, maybe share the story about meeting George Strait. Then we'd broadcast it on a Saturday evening during our prime listening hours. We typically reach about 50,000 listeners across Central Texas." "What would I have to do to prepare?" Daniel asked. "Just be yourself," Jack said. "Practice your songs, but don't overthink it. The roughness around the edges is part of your charm. You're not a polished Nashville product, and that's a good thing. You're real." They scheduled the live session for the first Saturday in September. Daniel left the station feeling both excited and terrified. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when Robert had first convinced him to play at the Longhorn. That evening, he video called Lily to tell her about the radio show. "You're going to be on the radio?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "That's so cool. Can I listen?" "I hope so, sweetheart. I'll make sure we record it so you can hear it even if you're doing something else that day." For the first time in their conversation, Rebecca appeared on screen next to Lily. "Daniel, congratulations. That's quite an accomplishment." "Thank you, Rebecca." He was surprised by her civil tone. "I heard about your custody motion," she continued, her expression neutral. "My lawyer thinks we should try mediation before going to court. Would you be open to that?" "Absolutely. I've never wanted to fight you, Rebecca. I just want to be part of Lily's life. Let me talk to Kenneth and my lawyer." Maybe we can work something out that's better for everyone, especially Lily." After the call ended, Daniel sat in stunned silence. Had Rebecca just suggested compromise? Was it possible that his positive changes were visible enough to make her reconsider her position? He called Linda Vaughn to tell her about Rebecca's mediation suggestion. "That's excellent news," Linda said. "Mediation is almost always preferable to court battles. It's less expensive, less combative, and gives you both more control over the outcome. I think your recent successes are showing Rebecca that you're stable and committed to improvement." The weeks leading up to the radio show passed in a blur of preparation. Daniel worked with Robert on song selection and arrangement. They chose 4 songs: "Amarillo" by Morning, as an opening tribute to George Strait, 2 of Daniel's original compositions, and "I Cross My Heart" as the closing number. Jennifer helped him prepare for the interview portion, asking him practice questions and giving feedback on his answers. "Don't memorize responses," she advised. "Just speak from the heart. Tell your truth. That's what people will connect with." Tom offered the use of the Longhorn for practice sessions, and several times Daniel performed the set in front of small groups of friends who provided feedback and encouragement. On the Thursday before the radio show, Daniel received an unexpected package. Inside was a note on letterhead from George Strait's management company. "Daniel, I heard about your upcoming radio debut. Congratulations on taking this step. I wanted you to have this as a reminder to stay true to yourself and your music. Best wishes always. George Strait." Wrapped carefully in tissue paper was a black cowboy hat, identical to the style George wore on stage. Daniel tried it on and looked at himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the confident man looking back at him. The night before the radio show, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed running through the songs in his mind, second-guessing every choice. Around 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Stop overthinking it. You're ready. You've got this. See you tomorrow." Another text came from Jennifer. "Proud of you no matter what happens. You've already won by having the courage to try." And one from Tom. "Your dad would be so proud. Hell, I'm proud. Go show them what real country music sounds like." Daniel smiled in the darkness, grateful for his friends, for the unexpected path his life had taken, and for the music that had saved him when he couldn't save himself. Saturday morning dawned with unusual coolness, a preview of the fall weather that would arrive in another month. Daniel woke early despite his late night, his nerves humming with anticipation. He went for a run through his neighborhood, trying to burn off some of the anxious energy. After showering and dressing in jeans, a button-down shirt, and the black cowboy hat George had sent, Daniel grabbed George's guitar and drove to Hill Country Radio's studios on the northwest side of San Antonio. Robert was already there when Daniel arrived, having come early to help set up the equipment. He grinned when he saw Daniel's hat. "Looking good, cowboy. Very authentic." "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Daniel admitted. "You're not. You're stepping into who you're meant to be. There's a difference." Michelle Torres greeted them warmly and walked Daniel through the studio setup. The broadcast booth was smaller than he had imagined, with soundproofing panels on the walls, professional microphones, and a window looking into the control room where Jack and the sound engineers would monitor everything. "We'll go live at 6 o'clock, Michelle explained. "We'll do the interview first, about 15 minutes. Then you'll perform your 4 songs. The whole thing will run about an hour with some commercial breaks. Jack will give you cues for when we're live and when we're in break. Try to relax and just have a conversation with me." Jennifer arrived around 5 o'clock, accompanied by Tom, Cassandra, and several regulars from the Longhorn. They would watch from the control room, a silent audience providing moral support. At 5:50, Michelle handed Daniel a pair of headphones and took her seat across from him. Through the window, Jack gave a countdown with his fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good evening, Hill Country. This is Michelle Torres, and welcome to Saturday Sessions, where we feature the best local talent in Texas country music. Tonight, I have someone very special with me. His name is Daniel Parker, and he's a mechanic, a veteran, and an incredibly talented singer-songwriter who's been making waves at the Longhorn Tavern here in San Antonio. Daniel, welcome. Thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm honored to be here. Let's start at the beginning. You served in Afghanistan. Can you tell us a bit about that experience and how you ended up back in San Antonio? Daniel took a breath and spoke honestly about his deployment, the challenges of combat, and the difficult transition back to civilian life. He didn't glorify war or play the victim. He simply told the truth about what it had been like and how he had struggled. Music became a lifeline for me, he explained, especially country music, particularly George Strait. My father raised me on his albums, and during my darkest times, those songs reminded me of home, of who I was before everything changed. And then you actually got to meet George Strait, didn't you? That's an incredible story. Daniel shared the story of the concert, meeting George backstage, their conversation about healing and loss, and the remarkable gift of the guitar he was holding. What did that experience mean to you? Michelle asked. It meant that I wasn't alone, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Here was this legend, someone who's achieved everything in music, and he took the time to see me as a person, to share his own struggles, and to encourage me to keep going. It reminded me that we're all just human beings trying to figure life out, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is show kindness to someone who needs it. The interview continued, covering Daniel's friendship with Robert, his performances at the Longhorn, and his journey toward healing through music. Michelle asked about his original songs, and Daniel explained how writing music had become a form of therapy. It lets me process things I can't express in regular conversation, he said. When I write a song about missing my daughter or dealing with memories from Afghanistan, I'm taking something painful and transforming it into something that might help someone else feel less alone. Then it was time for the music. Daniel adjusted the guitar, took a breath, and launched into Amarillo by Morning. His voice came through strong and clear, filling the studio with authentic Texas country soul. He sang about cowboys and rodeos, about perseverance in the face of setbacks, about finding meaning in the journey. When the last note faded, Michelle smiled. That was beautiful. George Strait himself would be proud. For his first original song, Daniel performed Empty Seat, a composition about missing Lily. The lyrics spoke of birthday parties attended via video call, of bedtime stories told over the phone, of a father's love that distance couldn't diminish. His voice cracked slightly on the chorus, the genuine emotion impossible to hide. Through the control room window, Daniel could see Jennifer wiping tears from her eyes. Tom had his arm around her shoulders, and even Robert looked moved. The second original, Coming Home Again, dealt with the experience of returning from war and feeling like a stranger in your own life. It was raw and honest, touching on PTSD, isolation, and the slow process of rebuilding. The lyrics didn't offer easy answers or false hope. They simply acknowledged the reality and affirmed the determination to keep fighting. After a brief commercial break, Michelle asked Daniel to close with one more song. This is I Cross My Heart, Daniel said into the microphone. It was my father's favorite George Strait song, and it's become special to me for a lot of reasons. This one's for John Parker, for George Strait, and for everyone who's ever made a promise they intended to keep. Daniel poured everything into the performance. Every note carried the weight of his love for his father, his commitment to Lily, his gratitude to George Strait. and his promise to himself that he wouldn't give up. The song built to its emotional climax, Daniel's voice soaring with power and vulnerability intertwined. When the final chord faded, there was a moment of silence. Then Jack's voice came through the headphones. "That was extraordinary, Daniel. Absolutely extraordinary." Michelle concluded the show, thanking Daniel and giving information about where listeners could hear him perform live. As the on-air light went dark, Daniel removed his headphones and released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Robert burst into the studio, followed by the others. "Danny, that was incredible!" The phones have been lighting up. People are calling in saying it's the best session we've done. Jack emerged from the control room holding a clipboard. "Daniel, we've had over 200 calls and emails in the last hour. Listeners want to know where they can hear you, if you have recordings available, when you're performing next. This is the kind of response we rarely see." Daniel felt overwhelmed. "I don't have recordings. I just play at the Longhorn on Friday nights." "Then maybe it's time to change that," Jack suggested. "Michelle and I would like to talk to you about recording an EP, maybe 5 or 6 songs. We have a small label partnership, nothing big, but enough to get your music out there properly." I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Michelle encouraged. "Take some time, talk to your friends, and let us know. But Daniel, you've got something real. Don't let that go to waste." That night, the Longhorn was packed beyond capacity. Word of the radio show had spread, and people had come hoping to hear Daniel perform in person. Tom had to turn away dozens of people at the door, apologizing but adhering to the fire code. Daniel and Robert took the stage to thunderous applause. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation and genuine excitement. "Thank you all for coming out," Daniel said into the microphone. "Thank you for listening to the radio show. Thank you for being part of this community. I'm just a guy who works on cars and loves country music, but you've all made me feel like what I do matters. So tonight, we're going to celebrate. We're going to play music, have fun, and remember what brings us together." They played for nearly 3 hours, taking only brief breaks. The audience sang along to every cover, listened intently to Daniel's originals, and created an atmosphere of pure joy. It felt less like a performance and more like a family reunion. During one break, an older couple approached Daniel. The woman had tears streaming down her face. "Our son died in Iraq 10 years ago," she said, her voice shaking. "He was a Marine, just 22 years old. Listening to you tonight, hearing your songs about service and sacrifice and trying to come home again, it helps us understand what he might have gone through. Thank you for giving voice to experiences that our boy couldn't share." Daniel embraced the woman, holding her while she cried, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your son was a hero. Please know that." Moments like these punctuated the entire evening. Veterans approached to share their stories. Parents thanked him for honoring the military experience. Young musicians asked for advice about songwriting and performance. Daniel tried to give each person the attention and respect they deserved. Around midnight, as the crowd thinned, Daniel's phone rang. The number was unknown, but something told him to answer. "Daniel? This is George Strait." Daniel's heart skipped. Mr. Strait, sir." George's warm laugh came through the phone. "I told you to call me George. I'm calling because I heard your radio show tonight. Someone from my management team lives in San Antonio and sent me a recording. Daniel, that was exceptional. Your original songs are powerful, and your voice has matured even since I met you. I'm impressed. Thank you so much. That means the world coming from you. I want you to know something," George continued. "When I gave you that guitar, I hoped it might inspire you. But you've done more than I expected. You've taken that inspiration and turned it into something genuine and meaningful. You're honoring the tradition of real country music, telling honest stories about real life. That's what it's supposed to be about. You changed my life, Daniel said, emotion overwhelming him. That night at the concert, the things you said, the kindness you showed, it gave me hope when I needed it most. We all need that sometimes, and now you're doing the same for others. That's how it works. We receive grace, and then we extend grace. Keep doing what you're doing, Daniel. The world needs more authentic voices, like yours. After the call ended, Daniel stood there holding his phone, trying to process that George Strait had called him personally to offer encouragement. Robert noticed his expression. Everything okay? That was George Strait. He heard the radio show and called to tell me he was impressed. Robert whistled low. Man, when you make an impression, you really make an impression. The following week brought more changes. Linda Vaughn called with news that Rebecca had agreed to mediation, scheduled for the end of September. The tone of Rebecca's recent communications had softened noticeably, suggesting she was genuinely open to compromise. Hill Country Radio invited Daniel back for another live session, this time taking calls from listeners during the broadcast. The station also began playing his original songs in regular rotation, marking the first time his music reached beyond live performances. Jack and Michelle presented a formal proposal for recording an EP. The terms were fair, giving Daniel creative control while providing professional production support. After reviewing it with Robert and Tom, Daniel signed the agreement. We'll start recording in October, Jack explained. Take your time, write more songs if you want, and we'll create something you're proud of. Tom pulled Daniel aside one evening at the Longhorn. Danny, I've been thinking. This place is getting too small for what you're doing. You need a bigger venue, and frankly, I'm getting too old to manage crowds this size. What would you think about partnering with me to expand? Maybe buy the building next door, knock through the wall, and create a proper music venue? Tom, I don't have that kind of money. No, but between the two of us, plus maybe some investors who've approached me after seeing your success, we could make it work. I'd handle the business side, you'd be the face and the main draw. We could bring in other local artists too. Create a real hub for authentic Texas country music. Daniel was stunned. You're serious? As a heart attack. Think about it. No pressure, but the opportunity is there if you want it. Daniel did think about it, discussing the proposal with Jennifer, Robert, and Cassandra. They all encouraged him to seriously consider it. This could be your future, Jennifer said. Not just a side thing, but a real career doing something you love, and that helps people. What about the auto shop? Daniel asked. My dad left that to me. Hire a manager to run the day-to-day operations, Cassandra suggested. Keep ownership, but free yourself to pursue music. Your father would want you to follow your passion, not feel obligated to his dream if it's not yours. The mediation with Rebecca took place on a Friday afternoon at the mediator's office. Daniel arrived early with Linda, his nerves on edge. Rebecca arrived with Kenneth and her attorney, and for an uncomfortable moment, they all sat in the waiting room together. But when they entered the mediation room and the mediator began facilitating conversation, Daniel saw something different in Rebecca's expression. It wasn't hostility or judgment. It looked almost like respect. I've been following what you've been doing, Rebecca said during a break in the formal discussion. The radio show, the performances, the way you've worked on yourself. Kenneth played me a recording of your song about Lily. It made me cry. That's how I feel every day I can't see her, Daniel replied quietly. I know, and I've been unfair. I let my fear that you weren't stable override Lily's need for her father. She misses you, Daniel. She talks about you all the time. The mediation resulted in a revised custody agreement that gave Daniel substantially more time with Lily, including alternating weekends, one evening per week, and extended time during holidays. It was more than he had hoped for. "Thank you," Daniel told Rebecca as they prepared to leave. "Don't thank me. You earned this by doing the work, by showing you're committed to being the father Lily needs." That night at the Longhorn, Daniel shared the news with his friends. The celebration was joyful and heartfelt, everyone recognizing this as a major victory. "To Daniel," Tom said, raising his glass, "for never giving up, even when it would have been easier to quit." "To friends who don't let you quit," Daniel countered, raising his own glass. "I couldn't have done any of this without all of you." Over the following weeks, Daniel began spending regular time with Lily again. They went to the zoo, the park, and the Riverwalk. He played guitar for her, teaching her simple chords and encouraging her interest in music. She attended one of his performances at the Longhorn, sitting in the front row with Rebecca and Kenneth, clapping enthusiastically after every song. The recording sessions for his EP began in October at a small but professional studio. Daniel worked with a talented producer who understood his vision for keeping the music authentic and stripped down. They recorded 6 songs, 4 originals and 2 covers that had special meaning. The experience was challenging but rewarding. Daniel learned about layering tracks, adjusting dynamics, and bringing songs to life in ways he hadn't imagined. Robert played guitar on several tracks, and they even convinced Tom to add harmonica to one song. In early November, Hill Country Radio hosted a release party for Daniel's EP, titled "Coming Home Again." The Longhorn was packed with supporters, media representatives, and music industry people from across Texas. George Strait sent a video message that played during the event, congratulating Daniel and encouraging listeners to support authentic Texas music. The EP received positive reviews from country music blogs and regional publications. Sales exceeded expectations, and streaming numbers grew steadily. Daniel wasn't going to become a millionaire from it, but the music was reaching people and making an impact. He officially partnered with Tom to expand the Longhorn, and construction began in December. The plan was to create a venue that could hold 300 people while maintaining the intimate, authentic atmosphere that had made the original special. On Christmas Eve, Daniel had Lily for the entire day. They baked cookies, watched holiday movies, and in the evening, he took her to a special event at the new venue space, still under construction but functional enough for a small gathering. Robert, Jennifer, Tom, Cassandra, Linda, and several other friends had gathered there. Daniel had arranged for a local children's choir to perform, and afterward, he sang several songs for Lily, including one he had written specifically for her, called "My Little Star." As he sang, looking at his daughter's face, glowing with happiness, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been drowning in darkness, barely holding on, seeing no path forward. A simple concert invitation from his best friend had set off a chain of events that had transformed his life. Meeting George Strait hadn't magically solved all his problems. He still attended therapy, still dealt with difficult memories, still had challenges to overcome. But that night at the AT&T Center, and the incredible kindness George had shown, had given Daniel something precious: hope. And from that hope had grown everything else: the music, the friendships, the healing, the reconciliation with Rebecca, and most importantly, the reconnection with Lily. After the singing ended and the small party wound down, Daniel stood outside the venue looking up at the Texas stars. Lily was inside with Jennifer, probably eating more cookies than was advisable on Christmas Eve. But Daniel didn't mind. He wanted to savor this moment of peace and gratitude. Robert came outside and stood beside him. "Hell of a year, huh?" "Hell of a year," Daniel agreed. "Bobby, I never properly thanked you for dragging me to that concert, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's what brothers do, Robert said simply. Besides, I didn't create your talent or your character. I just gave you a push when you needed one. You did all the hard work. We did it together. All of us. Daniel gestured back toward the venue where their friends were gathered. That's what I've learned this year. We're not meant to struggle alone. We're meant to lift each other up, to show kindness when someone needs it, to believe in people even when they've stopped believing in themselves. George Strait taught you that, Robert observed. He reminded me of it. But really, you and Jennifer and Tom and everyone else had been showing me all along. I just wasn't ready to see it yet. They stood there in comfortable silence, two friends who had weathered decades together, watching the stars and contemplating the mysteries of life. Inside, Lily appeared at the door. "Daddy, come back inside. Jennifer says we can open one present each before we go home." Daniel smiled and waved. "Coming, sweetheart." Before going back inside, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to George Strait's management number, knowing it would likely get forwarded. "Merry Christmas, George. Thank you for showing a humble veteran that kindness can change lives. You certainly changed mine. I hope I can pay forward even a fraction of what you gave me. Daniel Parker." He didn't expect a response, but 15 minutes later, his phone buzzed. "Merry Christmas, Daniel. Keep making that beautiful music and being a light for others. That's the greatest gift you can give. Proud of you. George." Daniel showed the message to Robert, Jennifer, and Tom. They understood what it represented. Not just a celebrity being nice, but a genuine connection between two people who understood life's struggles and the importance of lifting others up. As the evening ended and Daniel drove Lily back to Rebecca's house, she chattered excitedly about the party, the songs, and all the friends she had met. "Daddy, are you happy now?" she asked as they pulled into Rebecca's driveway. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm very happy." "Good, because when you're happy, I'm happy. And your music makes lots of people happy. Mommy even said so." Daniel walked Lily to the door where Rebecca waited. She smiled, genuinely smiled, and invited him in for a moment. "Kenneth and I have been talking," she said, once Lily had run upstairs to get ready for bed. "We'd like to have you over for dinner next week. Nothing formal, just the four of us. Kenneth wants to get to know you better, and I think it would be good for Lily to see us all getting along." "I'd like that," Daniel said, surprised and touched by the invitation. Driving home that night, Daniel reflected on the year's journey. From the depths of despair to this moment of genuine happiness, the path had been neither straight nor easy. But every setback, every challenge, every moment of doubt had led him here. He thought about his father, hoping John Parker could somehow see what his son had become. He thought about the other veterans still struggling, wishing he could reach them all and offer the same hope he had received. He thought about George Strait and the remarkable gift of kindness that had catalyzed so much change. Most of all, he thought about the future. The expanded Longhorn would open in spring. His music was reaching more people every day. His relationship with Lily was stronger than ever. He had a community of friends who loved and supported him. And he had hope. Real, tangible, sustaining hope for all the good things still to come. At a stoplight, Daniel looked at himself in the rearview mirror. The man looking back was different from the one who had existed a year ago. This man smiled more easily, carried himself with quiet confidence, and had purpose in his eyes. This man was healing, growing, and using his experiences to help others. "Thank you," Daniel whispered to the universe, to his father, to George Strait, to his friends, and to whatever force had guided him through darkness back into light. The light changed to green. Daniel pressed the accelerator and drove forward, into the night, into the future, into whatever came next. knowing now that he had the strength to face it.